Welcome to the Occult Rejects. We are two former secret society members who were determined to show the public the truth that occultism has been purposely integrated into every aspect of society, from politics to music, Hollywood, and science. This is used to manipulate the public as a whole and to protect the fake elite. The symbols are used all around us to affect world events and public perception, our behavior, and even our future. We will translate the occult so that you have eyes to see. We reject their agenda to give you the tools to save yourself.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the Occult Rejects with your hosts Lux
and the NY Patriot.
Today, this afternoon, we have the privilege of having Mario from Symbolic Studies come on the show and to break down tarot. He's covered this in depth on Symbolic Studies for more than 2 years now. So really appreciate him having coming on. So thanks for coming on the show, Mario.
Yeah, definitely appreciate it. You were also somebody that we had a lot of listeners suggest to have on too. So I'm happy about that.
That's awesome.
Yeah, I'm happy that we were able to get you on, and for the listeners as well. Yeah.
Very cool, of course. Yeah, thanks for having me on. This is awesome. Always stoked to talk about tarot. There's a lot to get into. I have a few cards, that we can chat about if you guys have any questions. Obviously, when you're dealing with this kind of material, there's a million different threads we can pull at, a million different tangents that we can kind of talk about. So happy just to see where everything goes,
Well, and before we get too deep into everything, just let everybody know where they can find you.
Yeah, of course. So you can find me at symbolicstudies.com. You can find all of my accounts from there. So I'm kind of all over the place. So I'm on, Instagram, YouTube, TikTok, Telegram, things like that. So if you go to symbolicstudies.com, though, you can find everything from there.
Cool.
Yeah, I think I have your links in the bottom already. Anybody wants to check you out.
Oh, nice. Right on.
Yeah.
Very, very excited to have you on because tarot for me is something near and dear to my heart. Being in the Golden Dawn, it was a big focus. And I think that with some occult practices, some have a bit more deeper occult value than other practices. And tarot to me has just always been something that I've found is a great tool deciphering so much of the situation within ourselves and what's going on in the world. And it goes way deeper than just a deck of cards. So I appreciate you coming on to talk about it because this subject deserves some light,
Yeah. For sure. Yeah, I totally agree. Honestly, the tarot was my gateway to occultism and to astrology and even to numerology and the Kabbalah and things like that. So it's really one of these things that just completely opened me up. Once I started reading about the tarot and really integrating it, the synchronicities went through the roof for me personally, and a lot of other interesting things started to happen. And it's fascinating too because it's like no matter how knowledgeable you are with the cards, there's still secrets to uncover.
Oh yeah.
Right.
And I like how you said we had spoke earlier. We spoke earlier before going live. And it was funny. Lux had asked me about you and the Kabbalah Tree of Life, and I was like, wow, I actually didn't ask the guy that, And if you thought that the tarot could link up with that, and I had used tarot a lot prior when I was kind of practicing on my own, and using my own books to practice before I joined the OTO. And I think I was even using Donald Michael Craig's 13 Lessons in Ceremonial Magic or some shit. And I was doing, I think every day you were supposed to be doing something, I think, with the cards. And I was just I don't know. I just never got any really even true enjoyment out of doing it as trying to, I guess, divination in that sense, or trying to figure out what's going on with me right now. I just couldn't get into it. And I never really, there was really no oomph behind trying to learn tarot like that. And eventually when I started getting to ceremonial magic and I went to the OTO and they had a fucking picture right there on the wall with all the cards on the fucking Tree of Life. And I was like, oh, would you look at that? And I was like, I started looking at it that way along with the Kabbalah. And I was like, holy fuck. I was like, now I think I have somewhat of an idea what the fuck I'm even looking at now. And for me, that way opened it up for me. For some reason, the other way wasn't doing much for me.
And just real quick for listeners, I'll go ahead and share a quick picture so that people can see, if you're watching, they can see what we're talking about with the overlay of cards over the Tree of Life.
Awesome, yeah.
Right, right.
That worked a lot
exactly.
for me.
Sorry.
Yeah, there you go.
Nice.
No problem.
Very cool. And to be honest, just the concept of the Tree of Life, or what I refer to now as the World Tree, is very, very deep in and of itself. And that's kind of a symbolic thread that I've been pulling at over the last couple of years. And there's a lot to get into with that. And I will definitely be bringing it up to today as I show you a couple of cards.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Oh, shit. I think I just kicked Lux out by accident. Sorry.
Yeah, it's all good. He'll be back, I'm sure.
Yeah. I meant to remove his. Sorry about that. I meant to remove your share screen, and I kicked you out.
It's all good, buddy.
I did that to Lee before, so you weren't the first. Then again, Lee could have dropped out himself, and I thought I kicked him. Who knows?
Right. So, sorry, what did I miss?
I think I just said something to the effect of like the Tree of Life as the symbol. I call it the World Tree as well. And I plan on doing a lot of work kind of moving forward, talking about world tree symbolism, because it's actually way more important and significant and deep than I think a lot of people realize.
I agree with that, yes.
Yeah.
Well, go ahead, give us the juice, man. Let me know.
So now, is that like a Golden Dawn deck, or no?
Yeah, so this is the Crowley Thoth deck.
Okay.
This is just the back of it. Yeah. And even just the back of the card, there's a lot to decode.
Right.
Yeah, for sure.
That's funny. I was in the OTO and I never owned the Thoth deck. Never once.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I actually had a Golden Dawn deck.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Right on. Nice. Yeah.
Well, and when it comes
this
to the
deck is
Golden
classic.
Dawn decks, there's different ones too.
Yeah, like I had a different one
True.
than Lux had. Yeah.
Right. The one that I had is it's different than other decks that call themselves Golden Dawn. So.
Right. Well, to begin with,
And now the Thoth deck, if you don't mind just explaining to people, there is extra cards in there, right? Than average, or some have been switched.
There has been a switch, and some people believe it's the correct switch, and so I believe you're probably referring to Lust and Balance or Adjustment, which is the 8th and 11th card of the Major Arcana. So yeah, that's something that's come up a few times recently, actually, as I've been talking to friends and stuff. So if you look at older decks like the Marseille deck, the Strength card will actually be number 8, and then the Justice card will be number 11. In the Thoth deck, it's completely flipped, and that's a whole conversation like in and of itself. And there's also a couple of Hebrew letters that have been switched as well, which affect the correspondences with the Emperor card and the Star card.
Right.
Yeah. So that's my understanding. And the way I put it, I think these systems are kind of like living systems, just like language. Language changes and evolves, and slang terminology gets brought into the fold and things like that. And so when I look at divination systems, I kind of look at them the same way. And people are free to create their own oracle cards or whatever, just based off of intuition too. So there's so many different ways of doing divination that I think it just makes sense that some of these systems that are seemingly established would evolve and change over time.
Sorry, go ahead, Lux.
Just quick background for listeners. The tarot. I think a lot of people kind of consider the tarot as a new system, just because the Rider-Waite deck had so much popularity in like 1910. It's when it first started. But if the system of tarot goes back way, way further than that, it's an ancient system, goes all the way back to ancient Egypt, and even ties to Hebrew language. Certain letters are tied to certain cards that go back thousands of years. So it's not a new system. It's just that, like we were just talking about, it's evolving over time.
Right, right. Yeah, exactly. And so the earliest depiction of tarot that I've seen personally, and I don't know if this is the end all be all, like earliest sort of like origin of it. I don't think so, but in The Secret Teachings of All Ages by Manly P. Hall, I'm not sure if you guys have looked into it or you guys have a copy or whatever.
I read it a
But
long
he
time ago.
actually has, okay, right on. He actually has this fold out photograph called the Bembine Tablet or Table of Isis, and it shows all of these little scenes, Egyptian scenes, and he basically says that what they actually are it's the tarot cards pretty much just laid out in one gigantic scene essentially. And so that's what he credits to be one of the earliest sort of like tarot decks out there. Of course it wasn't a deck, it wasn't printed on paper, but it was this big relief artistic piece or whatever. So definitely Egypt at the like, at the latest, and I'm sure it goes back even further.
Yeah, I've heard Egypt as well. So I mean, that makes it pretty old if that's true.
And even
sure.
the modern playing card deck that we use for cards, whatever, poker, that card deck is based on the tarot.
Yeah.
So it's why you have 4 suits, et cetera, et cetera. But it was more or less like a way for people to hide study of tarot, from what I understand. Maybe you know more about that, like because in certain parts of the world at certain times, witchcraft, tarot, hand in hand, so they were banned, and so people developed sort of like a playing card deck that could be disguised so that they didn't know that they were studying tarot when the officials came to take a look at what you had in your house.
Totally. Yeah, that's my understanding as well. Absolutely based off of the same system. You can read tarot using playing cards if you really wanted to. You're not going to have the major arcana, but you can still do divination with it. And I would say, too, that most kind of popular games that we have now that are fairly established, most of the games that you associate with Vegas, as an example, it's like Vegas is like a divination city that you're going there to do divination, basically. So all of these different games, they all have occult origins, and it has to do with divination, including dice, just what dice used to be used for. It was more of like a divinatory sort of thing. And I think what's happened is a lot of these divination systems, at some point, they just get turned into games. But when you look into the origins of them, it has, ties to other things.
That's wild. I'm thinking about that now and not realizing how much Vegas does kind of have like a lot of divination type stuff to it. I see we have a listener in our chat now, my boy Arnold. He's the one who does the Twin Peaks watch party for our fans. And there is in season 3 when Cooper comes into this world, he gets in this yellow and black Jeep with some chick wearing purple. In my opinion, that was the Scarlet Whore in her Bumblebee car, driving him and drops him off at Vegas. That's where she leaves him. And from there, his story starts. That's so funny. So did he have to go there first for his character to get decided to where it was going for the rest of the show? Just very weird.
Yeah, I lived in Vegas for quite a while, and I'll tell you, there's a certain energy in that town. There is a certain feeling of, it's hard to explain, but it's like a electricity, and it wasn't just something I went there on a weekend. I was there for years living there, and it felt different than any other place. So yeah, it's definitely a hub for divination. I totally agree with that.
Yeah, for sure. No, it makes sense on a lot of different levels. Absolutely. So when I see playing cards now, I can't not think of tarot for sure.
Right.
All right, so
But,
we'll stop interrupting you and we'll let you go now with your cards.
Oh, no worries. I was just going to say regarding the Scarlet Whore, the Whore of Babylon, I'm not sure if you're aware of her placement within the tarot, but she definitely has a card that she's associated with, and it's pretty obvious once you know what to look for, right?
All right, yeah. We'll see if maybe, if we come across that. I honestly thought maybe like a few, like maybe 2 or 3, but maybe I could be wrong with that too. I think there's different... Really, the feminine energy, I just think, is kind of the Scarlet Whore, just in different phases, depending on what it's doing at that time.
Yeah, which is why I think that it represents, in my opinion, the threes of all suits for the Lesser Arcana are a representation of Binah, Scarlet Whore, stuff like that.
All right, but
yeah. No, I totally hear you loud and clear. That makes sense too, for sure. I really think though that when Crowley, when he made the Lust card, that was a very, very obvious depiction of the Whore of Babylon, the Scarlet Whore. Which I guess I just have it here because I figured there was a chance that we would talk about it. And
Go for it. Start off with that one.
So here it is. Hopefully you guys can see this nice and clear.
Yes.
This is the Lust card. This is number 11. This is one of the cards that was affected by this switch, And here you can see a woman riding a lion. So she's riding a beast. So this card is associated with Leo. And when you look at classic depictions of the Scarlet Woman, the Whore of Babylon, you're typically going to see a woman riding something. So like I love William Blake, his artwork. I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with his stuff, but the William Blake version of the Whore of Babylon is very, very similar, to this card. And so she's riding a man, and the man has 7 heads. Notice that there's 7 heads on this lion, and she's holding a chalice. And so it's said that she holds a chalice of filth. So she's like the mother of abominations. So she reminds me of a lot of other myths that are kind of related to this, right? Just like what you're saying, just kind of like her energy, what she emanates, speaks to a lot of like feminine myths that exist out there, a lot of dark feminine sort of mythologies. I see a lot of Lilith, in her symbolism too. I think of Tiamat. She's kind of known as the mother of abominations. There's a Norse goddess. Her name's Angerboda. There's a similar sort of thing going on there. But she holds a chalice. This chalice holds filth. And so you could see here she's symbolically holding this chalice. And she is controlling this beast. So like one of the aspects of this card is controlling kind of like this inner beast. There's a lot of sexual connotations with this card too, which I think is very interesting, kind of speaking to the Scarlet Whore thing, and then also speaking to Lilith as well. Also, too, there's a major demiurgic sort of thing going on with this card as well. The demiurge. Typically, the demiurge has a lion head and a serpent body. And really, this card is like the culmination of that. So you'll even see that, on the right-hand side, its tail. It's kind of like a serpentine tail. And then it has a lion head, right? And so this card actually corresponds in Hebrew with Teth, which means serpent. And so there's a serpentine correspondence with this card, which I think is interesting because I made a video about this last Leo season. For those who don't know, right, I make content based on the signs during each sign itself. So right now I'm doing Cancer, going to move into Leo pretty soon. We'll start making content based around Leo. And I put out a video last year essentially saying that serpents, felines, and dragons have had a long historical connection with each other and are in a lot of myths basically interchangeable, essentially, and even when you look at how serpents and felines are, there's so much overlap. It's really interesting. So with both species, there's slit eyes. Not all of them have it, but both of them have slit eyes. They both have fangs. They both hiss. Obviously the serpentine nature of how a snake moves is kind of similar to like a cat's tail. Even how they fight and strike, it's this very quick sort of strike sort of thing and then retreat. There's a lot of symbolism that overlaps. And so in this video, I explore all of that. And I also read from some symbolic reference books that pretty much back up this whole entire claim. So most of what I try and talk about, I really want to have the receipts for it. And so I lean on my library, my symbolic library of reference books and everything else, quite a bit before I actually start putting information out there. I love speculation, but I love it when the connections actually make sense, you know? So if I speculate, oh, what's up, dude? It's Gabe. Nice.
Oh, you two know each other. Oh, awesome.
Oh, yeah.
I just happened to put that up because I was like, oh, all right, I'll add that. Hydra is the minor deacon of Leo.
Yeah, he's great, man. He would be a great guest too. His symbolic awareness is through the roof, and so we've had a lot of great conversations together.
Yeah, he's a great dude. He used to, I used to get excited to see what his comments were on the vids that I used to do, because he'd drop shit and I'd be like, I don't even understand half this stuff. It would like blow my mind. Some of his comments.
That sounds about right, actually.
Yeah, I was like, fuck, this guy did a better show than I did with his comments.
Yeah. So, so I think very deliberately, this is the Whore of Babylon. This is the Scarlet Woman. I also think that she appears too in the Star card, which will take us
Yes.
on this other tangent.
Totally agree.
Yeah, we brought that up in the Scarlet Horse series.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, Lux
Nice.
Lux picked that one, I think, really to cover himself.
Well, for just the reason why I even brought it up is because in the deck that I had for the Golden Dawn, that card is just so
It was
obvious
wow,
that it's the same figure.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so I think even Crowley probably talked about this somewhere, but it makes a lot of sense. And so even notice too, in the previous card, she's holding a chalice, and here she's holding two, right? And so this speaks to a lot of things that I'm really, really interested in right now and have been for a little while. But notice that in this card, and I don't know if you guys will be able to see this, but basically this star up here is 7-pointed.
Mm-hmm.
And even the star that emanates from her chalice right there is also 7-pointed. And so there is a long tradition of 7-pointed symbolism that aligns with this card. And if you notice in the Lon Milo Duquette deck, I don't know if you guys have ever seen that, but he's definitely a thing. This is his deck.
See, now I think this all references the Seven Spear to Netzach, and that's kind of like the maiden in a sense of the Scarlet Whore. That's what I've always thought with all that.
Gotcha. Yeah, no, I think there's a lot of ways of interpreting it. And so I have a newer way of interpreting it that I would love to throw down and see what you guys think. And so he obviously puts the 7-pointed star, right, as the star. And so this is the star of it's the same star that you're going to see, you know, at OTO lodges and Thelemites, you know, obviously revere this star and everything else. It's been referred to as the Babylon star, right? And so Babylon has 7 letters in it. And so each tip will belong to one of those letters. And a lot of times when you see this Babylon star, it says Babylon right around it, and then you see 7s inside of it, you know, and there's this like Vesca Pisces Yoni shape in the middle, and all of these different 7s. And so my interpretation, based on my research, is that actually this star, there's a specific star that this is referencing in the night sky, and it's referencing the North Star, in my opinion. So it's an ancient sort of reference to the North Star, which is the pole star, also known as Polaris. And the reason why 7 associates with Polaris is because there are 2 constellations that revolve around Polaris that have 7 stars. One of them is Ursa Minor, which is closer to Polaris. And actually Polaris is considered the 7th star of Ursa Minor, which is the Little Dipper, which is the Little Bear. And then there's also Ursa Major, which is the Big Dipper or the Great Bear, which also has 7 stars. So we're talking about the dippers here. The dippers revolve closely around Polaris, so they're considered circumpolar constellations. So this is in contrast to like the constellations around the wheel of the zodiac, the ecliptic. They dip below the horizon, so I can't see all of the constellations at night. I can only see a certain select amount of them in the night sky, and then I have to wait for the year in order for this rotation to occur. But I can see Ursa Major and Minor basically like year round, you know? And so the North Star is supremely important to a lot of ancient groups and cultures. And pretty much this is like my big work right now, is kind of unveiling all of the myths and all of the symbols and the importance that has been baked into North Star symbolism. And to me, this is just the thread that keeps on giving. Honestly, it's the gift that keeps on giving, because the information tied to it is so epic and huge, but it unlocks so much other stuff. A lot of occult secrets, a lot of like just different ways of looking at like cosmology and looking at astrology and everything else. So just to give you an example of like how significant this star was and how significant and how closely tied these constellations were to the North Star, my understanding is that Ursa Major and Minor, the Great Bear and Little Bear, they revolve around the North Star. And if you look at Ursa Major once a season for a year, you're going to see it in 4 different positions around, the North Star. And funny enough, Ursa Major kind of looks like a 7. It has 7 stars and it kind of looks like a 7. And in my opinion, this is actually literally where we get the shape of the number 7 from. So there's groups that have revered these constellations, and they've had different tools that kind of look like the number 7, like the Egyptians. They have this thing called the adze tool. Yeah, dude. Gabe and I, we've gotten into a lot of this stuff together, so he knows exactly what I'm putting out there.
I'll keep throwing it up.
Nice. And so it's interesting that Ursa Major kind of looks like a number 7. It kind of looks like an upside down, like L that's flipped, which kind of looks like a 7. And so this is where we get the swastika from. So when you look at the swastika, you're actually looking at Ursa Major as it rotates around the North Star once per season. This is what, like, these Eastern groups that use the swastika, that's what they're actually referencing. So that middle point in the swastika is actually the pole star.
I was actually
it's the star that everything revolves around.
I was thinking of that black sun symbol, and I was like, could that, like, if you were just watching that constellation through the sky, could it maybe make that? I was actually thinking something close to the swastika for a second when you were talking about the shapes. I was like, And I was like, I'm just thinking something weird.
No, absolutely, for sure.
It's pretty wild.
And so when you look at the night sky and you're looking at the pole star, you're looking at the North Star, you'll notice that all of the stars are rotating around it. So if you took a time-lapse photo of the northern sky, you're going to see one star in the middle that's essentially stationary, and then you're going to see a streak of all of these other stars rotating around it, just like a great wheel, right? And so this is why, actually, a lot of wheel symbolism encodes North Star symbolism esoterically. And so here we're talking about the 7 stars of Ursa Major and the 7 tipped star of the star card. And so let's look at the number 7 card in the major arcana. And it's the Chariot card. And so the Chariot card has a lot to do with wheel symbolism and movement. It's related to Cancer. And so I think of, like, the symbol for Cancer, like there's this churning or turning, if you will, right? Well, it turns out, actually, in my opinion, the star that you see on top of his head right there is actually the North Star. It's actually Polaris. And so you see the canopy of stars above him. Those 4 pillars or posts or poles are symbolic of the 4 directions or the 4 fixed signs of astrology. And so when you look at the star Polaris in the sky, it's at the crossroads of several crosses in the sky, several astrological crosses, right? So there's like the cardinal cross, the fixed cross, the mutable cross. And so that's what those 4 poles represent. And so this star, really, it's significant, and it is something that I think basically anybody would benefit from understanding more. And there's a million different correspondences with it. There's a million different ways of looking at it. There's a million different metaphors on how to break it down, But as it relates to the Whore of Babylon, once again, what's really, really fascinating is that the church has the Vatican, they've reappropriated the North Star, and they've actually attributed it to Mary. A lot of people don't know that. And so Mary sometimes is referred to as the Virgin Mary Star of the Sea. The Star of the Sea is the North Star, because the North Star is the guiding star. It was the preeminent star in the sky that people looked towards when they were sailing the 7 seas. So when you think about the number 7, I tend to associate it with a lot of the stuff that I'm throwing down right now. But one of the main things on why 7 is encoded with the North Star, and once again, this is the number 7 card, is because really my understanding is that there is an actual stairway to heaven. When you see Jacob's ladder, like in Freemasonic artwork and stuff like that, this actually literally exists. And what it symbolically represents is the journey to the afterlife, which is at the northern sky. And so a lot of groups have understood this, that the stairway to heaven goes to the north. It goes to the North Star. Symbolically, I'll say. Perhaps not literally, but symbolically.
Have you ever heard of the Voynich manuscripts?
Yes.
There's a couple of parts in there where you will see like 7 pointed stars like around females, and it looks like, I think a few of them might have like a Jacob's ladder looking thing in their hand. And that was I covered that with somebody on another show with somebody else, And so, yeah, you even just said it right there, too. That's weird. Like, there were 7-pointed stars, I remember, in that with the Jacob's Ladder.
So
Very
Nice.
interesting.
That's
So-
fascinating.
check this out. So this is the deck that I'm going to share my screen right now. This is the star card for the Dowson and Godfrey deck. This is the one that I used in the Golden Dawn, and I think it's going to be a little bit trippy for you to see.
Oh yeah, the Hermetic Tarot.
Yeah. So again, you have the 7-pointed star, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yep.
7-pointed star, and it goes into detail here all around this star with all of the different astrological symbols. And of course, then on the right hand side, you see the tree of life. Again, you see the female cupbearer pouring something in to what
Yep.
I think is like, the great abyss, or the river of life, whatever. So that's just more of the confirmation of what you just said, that this is absolutely. See, what I came up with when I was thinking about the sort of breakdown of what you just were talking about, I
Mhm.
thought that it was referring to the dog star, because
Yes, that's a common understanding.
right, because on the moon card you have, 2 dogs, you have a sun in the sky, 2 dogs separated by a body of water. So I was thinking that would have something to do with Sirius, the dog star, and that's what they were talking about. But this Polaris stuff is very interesting.
Yeah. So regarding the number 7 real quick, it's worth mentioning that when I read some material about Ascension work, about Ascension documents and scripts and what have you, a lot of Ascension material has to do with the number 7. And so there's this old belief that it takes 7 steps, 7 phases, 7 different things to occur in order to go from this side, the material plane, to the other side. And so this is why 7 is so important here. So we have 7 days of the week, 7 colors of the rainbow, et cetera, et cetera. It goes on and on and on. 7 chakras, goes on and on and on. And so this number 7 is way more significant than I ever gave it credit for, to be completely honest. We're talking about Vegas, lucky number 7. And then just all of the 7s that have been coming up in this conversation, right? This has to do with this idea that it takes 7 different things to get from one place to the other. And so there are old documents and pieces of work from like the East, like Chinese stuff, where they show Ursa Major and they literally have an association with each star of Ursa Major symbolically corresponding with a planet. And they called it the pace of you. And that you would literally first go to the moon, and then you would walk this step-by-step sort of ladder through Ursa Major in order to get to the next place, or in order to go to the other side. And so this is why there are 7 traditional planets as well. I think it really has a lot to do with Ursa Major, and it all has to do with Ascension material and Ascension beliefs, using the number 7, and number 7 kind of encoding the journey from this side to the other side. So that's another aspect to it. And then notice too that we're talking about the Chariot card. And so it's like there's this journeying sort of thing implied here. But one of the fascinating, like, esoteric things with this card is that the charioteer is not going anywhere. In fact, he's fused into a cubic stone, and the Sphinx in front of him, the 2 Sphinxes, they're not even reined, and they're not even standing, so they're not going anywhere anytime soon. And there's no implied movement with the canopy, with his hair, with anything. So he's actually not going anywhere. And so it implies this internal movement, this internal journey. It implies kind of like a lot of Merkaba symbolism. If you're meditating and you're traveling astrally, you're not physically going anywhere. You're going somewhere in a different way, but you're not physically going anywhere. And so my understanding is that a lot of groups, especially, this gets into really far out stuff, but it seems like this is the right audience, the right people to talk about this stuff with. But my understanding is that there's a lot of groups who are interested in magical workings. Maybe you could call it black magic, and they're using the Lovecraftian pantheon to do their work. They're not using the Egyptian pantheon. They're not using whatever, any of these other gods. They're using the Lovecraftian gods to do this stuff. And
I've
I was
seen that.
blown away that there's an acknowledgement of the North Star as I'm presenting it right here, which is how I learned some of this stuff within some of that work, within some of that material. And one of the guys who's really wrote a lot about this is Simon. There's a Necronomicon book called The Gates of the Necronomicon by Simon. And literally on the cover, the main image on the cover are the 7 stars of Ursa Major. And then I'm inclined to think that Simon is actually Peter Lavenda.
I was going to bring him up.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, because I know he's covered it, but I was going to say there's some people who thought that he was... that he actually may have written the book. And I think James Wasserman's the one who published it, right? With his publishing company?
I'm not sure.
Yeah,
I wouldn't be surprised at all. Yeah. But my understanding is that Simon and Lavenda are the same guy. And he wrote about it in The Gates of the Necronomicon. He gets into all of this stuff about Ursa Major, Minor, the Great Bear, Little Bear, how the Egyptians understood it, all this stuff. And he basically said, this is how you get to the other side. You get to the other side by accessing this central gateway, which symbolically is represented with this North Star, by way of tapping into it at certain times of the year, based on the position of Ursa Major and Ursa Minor. And so that was a very helpful book for me to read. And then he also wrote a book called Stairway to Heaven under his real name, Peter Lavenda. And he talks about all this stuff at length in that book too. All of these different groups throughout history that have thought that the supreme deity exists at the north, that we come from the north and return to the north, and that there's a northern gateway that you can access and tap into, and that a lot of groups throughout history have understood that.
Yeah, and especially when you look at the Egyptians, right? They built entire structures that were taking celestial light. You know, they built them around these different astrological positions and star systems so that light would pass through the pyramids into certain chambers at certain times of the year where they were meditating, doing these rituals. And to me, when I looked at that, I thought, okay, they understood that there are gateways, ways to pass between the spheres of the tree of life or dimensions, whatever you want to call it. And they just had a deep understanding of knowing that once you utilize this light, based on a certain time of year, certain events, that you could more or less transition out of this sphere.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
I definitely agree with that, man. Yeah.
There's a ritual called the opening of the mouth ritual. It's Egyptian in nature. And they have this tool called an adze tool. And it looks like a number 7, actually. And you can see certain pieces of art and what have you that have this tool touching the mouth of a pharaoh. And basically, my understanding is that this is symbolic of Ursa Major, and that it's symbolic of opening the central gate so that they can pass through, you know, so that he can transition smoothly to go to the other side. And so what they're really talking about is the opening of the magnetosphere around Earth. So, you know, the Northern Lights?
Right. So
the Northern Lights in the north, you know, it's because there's an opening or a cusp at the north, you know, of the electromagnetic sphere around Earth. And so the Egyptians thought of this cusp as the horn of a great bull. And they said that you would go towards the horn of the great bull to exit out of here. And so what we're dealing with is a toroidal sort of structure, which looks kind of like a donut, which is very much in line with the tree of life as well. So when you look at a tree, notice that the trunk, you know, there's a kind of there's this phallic polar pillar sort of thing in the middle with its trunk, and then it fans out at the top, and then it fans out down below. It's like you're talking about the torus field.
I was gonna say, it looks like the torus field from a black hole. Kind of.
Yeah.
And
so
especially with the Gateway project, Gateway Experience documents that the CIA did, where they were looking into all of this stuff. They even use graphics that look exactly what you're talking about. This sort of donut or recirculating. It looks very similar to an apple too, of this recirculating energy starting at the north. And yeah.
Oh yeah,
man.
No, you totally got it, dude. That's the deal. And so, really, my understanding is that the North Star is symbolic of that great central opening, at the North. And basically, I think that what's happened is that we went from a polar understanding of reality to a solar understanding of reality, and that there was a switch that occurred. And so now we overemphasize the power of the sun, and we kind of give it too much symbolic credit in a lot of ways. And it's completely, in a way, I think it's been promoted. I think it's part of some sort of long-term agenda to be hardcore like heliocentrists, and like that's it, and just be exclusive to this concept of just the sun is everything, the sun is all, and we don't talk about, this other star that a lot of ancient cultures really highly revered and had a lot to say about it and baked it into a lot of their myths and everything else. Mm-hmm. So as an example, this book that I read called The Night of the Gods by John O'Neill, I reference it often because it blew my mind and it changed my perspective on a lot of different things. But he wrote it in the late 1800s. It was very synchronistic that an original copy would even end up in my hands. But I read it from cover to cover. And he makes the case that a lot of mythology is polar in nature, meaning that it has to do with this central pole. Sometimes it's called the world pillar. It's referred to as the world tree. It's referred to as the axis mundi. It's related to the northern sky. It's related to Polaris. And that a lot of myths were actually speaking to different things relating to this pole. And now it's misunderstood. So people think of, a deity as an example and might just say like, oh, well, it's a solar deity. He's a sun god. It all has to do with the sun. But in actuality, a more ancient understanding was that this god was actually related to this polar sort of concept. And one of the gods he says this about is Ptah, this Egyptian god named Ptah. So Ptah stands very upright. He has a staff that he's holding. They say that this is where the design for the Oscar statue came from. And he was saying that if you ask modern Egyptologists, that they're all going to say that this god is a solar god, that he has to do with the sun. And he makes the case that he's not a solar god, but he's actually a polar god. He's symbolic of this central pole, And so he basically is saying that we have a complete misunderstanding of a lot of these gods, and that there's another type of god in town, and it's actually a polar deity. So we went from polar worship to a solar worship sort of thing in culture, which to me makes a lot of sense, actually, personally.
Yeah. I could see that making sense. Wow.
Yeah, so when I see tarot stuff now, I'm like, I don't necessarily, I see a lot of polar symbolism that I did not see before. I see a lot of North Star symbolism that was beyond me, several years ago, but now I have a much better understanding of today.
Yeah.
I even think a lot of them even have mixtures of just different, the male and female energy in some tarot cards. It's like even though it might be kind of like on one side, there might still be symbolism that I never really noticed before. That kind of does show like mixtures of things. Like it's almost like a story, really. I mean,
yeah.
And there's probably like 5 or 6 really deep things on each fucking card, anyway.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Besides the obvious of what you're looking at. I even thought, it's funny, when we covered, I think, the Scarlet Whore in the Chariot card, I think we had mentioned that reminded me of the whole twin scene in The Matrix, when there were the two twins were fighting and they were going across the cars and all that shit. And then like when they get somewhere, they go into like this red it's like this red house, and all it is like weapons and shields and like old fighting stuff up on the walls. And I was like, they just drove into Gabur from the Chariot. Or vice versa, or they left from it. You know what I'm saying? But it was like really weird. I was like, yo, like I really think this is symbolizing the twins right now in the Chariot.
Oh, dude, for sure. I mean, there's so much. I'm blown away at when I watch mainstream Hollywood movies, how much Kabbalistic stuff is in there, how much tarot stuff is in there, how much occult stuff is in there. It's just if you have the eyes to see it, that's pretty much the main difference. But these films encode a shocking amount of information and material. Not all of them, but a lot of them do, like a very high degree.
Yeah, when me
And it's just like, this is ancient psychology we're talking about. Occultism to me is like ancient psychology. So it's like, why wouldn't you tap into this deep well of information that's going to speak to somebody like on a subconscious level, you know, if it's available to you?
Dude, you're speaking our language. I'll tell you that. This is a lot of the stuff that we cover on our show, and it kind of coming to the same conclusions that you are about the meaning of these cards, the encoded message, and to me, it definitely does seem like a roadmap to leave this dimension, or like the certain things that are needed to leave this dimension, things that are needed to escape, and so it's all hidden in symbology in the cards. So
I think they'll even show
absolutely.
you, depending on like, then if you kind of look at it a different way, I think they'll even show you like the vice of that, which is what keeps you here, like kind of the descending down the tree as well. You know, so right there, those are already two ways of looking at the cards, if it's like that. So just think of how much shit there is to see in those things.
Right. For sure. I recently got into the symbolism tied to Royal Arch Freemasonry. Ooh. I'm not sure if that's ever been a study for you guys. No. It's really fascinating, though, because it actually has a lot to do with this card. I'm still looking at it because it's on screen, right? But a lot of the signs have to do with this northern symbolism. And so Cancer, as an example, the Babylonians looked at Cancer as the gateway of man. And they considered Capricorn to be the gateway of the gods. So they believed that we came through Cancer and then we exited through Capricorn, which even symbolically makes sense. You know, when I think of Cancer, you know, obviously I think of water, I think of the moon, I think of just like bulby sort of shapes. I think of just kind of like the roundness that a mom gets when she's, you know, when she's pregnant, she's going to have a child. You know, everything becomes this kind of like circular sort of thing. Life is very much related to, you know, the circle and curves and everything else. And so they believe that you came through Cancer and then you leave through Capricorn. Well, that kind of makes sense to me too. Capricorn corresponds with the devil card. It's very earthy. You know, we're all going to return to the earth in a lot of ways. And so it's just kind of like a fact of the matter that, you know, death is more related to Capricorn, which is ruled by Saturn, right? Saturn is a very slow, lumbering planet. You know, it's associated with black and lead, and Saturn eats its children and things like that, right? And so coming through Cancer and leaving through Capricorn, to me, makes a lot of sense in many different ways. So even, you know, coming through Cancer symbolically, it's like, this is where you get your chariot. You know, this is where you get like your body, essentially, that is able to move. You know, in a way, we're all symbolically chariots, right? And so interesting, when you look at the Royal Arch, their whole entire thing was that the arch connects both pillars, right? And at the very top of the arch, there's a keystone. And this keystone is a wedge. And if you look at certain Masonic tracing boards and artwork and whatever, this wedge is sometimes there and sometimes the wedge is missing. Well, I'm realizing and I'm learning that this is part of a ritual, actually. But what this wedge does, when it's removed, it allows light from the heavens to shine through. So sometimes what you'll see is the eye of God or the eye of providence looking through that wedge and shining light through that hole. And in certain works of art, they literally show that that wedge is actually Cancer. And so they will literally put the Cancer symbol within that wedge of the keystone, okay? And so they're saying that Cancer is like at the top of the wheel of the zodiac in a lot of ways. And this gets into a lot of other things that kind of back up all of the stuff that I'm saying, but I think it's interesting that they associate it with Cancer. This card is related to Cancer. And you see on the top of the head of the charioteer, you can see the same Royal Arch, and you could see that the North Star is at the very top of that arch. It's kind of symbolically the wedge. And the Hebrew letter associated with this card is Ket, which means canopy or fence. And so you could see that there's literally a canopy above the charioteer. And so it's amazing that these letters are so encoded into these cards that they literally depict a lot of times the thing that the word or the letter even represents. And so this canopy is the canopy of heaven, essentially, you know. And so if we're symbolically looking at the canopy of heaven, like a biblical firmament, as an example, even just symbolically, right? The very top of it would be the North Star, essentially.
Mm.
You know, the top of the dome or what have you. And so, you know, once again, I'm not really dogmatic. I'm not saying I know what's even going on up there or where we're at or what the cosmology is place or anything like that. I'm just kind of picking up the signs and symbols and whatever. And I think a lot of this stuff is just, you know, very, very intriguing. You know, what I've seen within, you know, a lot of like Freemasonic, you know, books and literature and whatever. The Royal Arch Masonry stuff is very much connected to this card in a lot of ways.
Yeah, definitely. And then you can even see more of the symbology of the left pillar, which is more associated with, you know, the black pillar right here on the left hand side, and then you also have the right hand pillar on the right hand side. So it just even more cements like the theory of what you're talking about. This is very deep stuff encoded in the cards. They're showing a way to possibly, that just, it's showing the mechanics of what keeps us here and how we can exit, you know.
That's a really good way of putting it. I totally agree with you. And in a lot of ways, I think that what tarot encodes, or what I think a lot of these groups are encoding, is that nice. What they're encoding is how to ascend upon death, you know. And I'm thinking that maybe the major arcana literally is kind of showing us that as well. And that I think that a lot of groups that are kind of doing things behind the scenes and they're a little more hidden or what have you, I think that they're passing along this secret, which used to be really, really important to a lot of groups. You know, there's a reason why there's the Egyptian Book of the Dead, the Tibetan Book of the Dead, etc. You know, and there's a reason why we don't really, kind of here in the West at least, like we have this very odd relationship with death, you know. But I really just think it's a symbolic rebirth, essentially, you know. And so I think that when you die, I don't think that's the end of the line. I think it is for you here physically, you know, but my personal understanding is I think that there is more and the journey continues. And that's actually kind of encoded in this card too, is just this coming and going. It seems as though we're kind of coming and going between realms. And so between planes, between the physical plane and then also kind of the etheric plane.
Yeah,
I think that's exactly the same. I think the same thing with those cards. I think you're seeing exiting and entering, you know, into the flesh and out of the flesh.
It's like secretly encoding what it takes to, it's almost like a video game. It's like, you know, you can't get to the next level of the video game until you learn this lesson, until you learn these important things that you have to fix within yourself, right? And then you get to the next level. So it's like you're always going to stay on a certain level until you do the certain things that are going to allow you to escape that level.
Yeah. I feel you, man. Loud and clear. So actually, I'm putting together a presentation right now that kind of speaks to some of the stuff we were just talking about. Do you mind if I share my screen for a second and show you some of this Royal Arch stuff and how it relates to this card? Yeah, because I think it'll actually like help fill in some gaps.
Awesome. Yeah, go for it.
So sweet. So right. All right. So my connection here admittedly is a little slow. So if it's not refreshing super quickly, I apologize, but you guys have probably seen this before. Washington is a Freemason.
Yeah.
Right. And so you have the twin pillars, which I actually see a lot of Gemini symbolism with these twin pillars. You know, Gemini, the symbol for it actually just looks like Roman numeral 2. And I see a lot of Gemini symbolism just within Freemasonry in general. In fact, for a second, I was wondering if this G here symbolically represents G for Gemini. My personal opinion actually is that it's symbolic of the number 7. Once again, we were talking about the number 7 card. We're talking about the 7 processes to ascend. And then you'll notice that in a lot of Freemasonic artwork, you will see 7 stars. And, you know, a lot of people might think that this is a Pleiadian reference, which is just above Taurus, and they're known as the 7 sisters. I'm making the case that I think it's actually more of a northern reference. I think it's Ursa Major or Minor. And then up top, you can see this wedge, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
So this is that wedge that I'm talking about. So symbolically, this is Cancer. And so here you can see just another depiction of things. You can see that the wedge at least in this illustration, has been removed. And then you can see the eye shining down on this 6-pointed star with the G in the middle. And so, you know, this artwork has been created like many times over, and there's lots of variation with everything. But I'm just showing you a few quick examples, and then also how it relates to Cancer. So here you see the moon with the 7 stars. Once again, the eye, the wedge is intact. So the royal arch with the wedge right here. I think it's interesting that there is a wheel here, or a circle. I do think of the chariot wheel.
Yeah.
How many numbers are on that wheel, or markings?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8.
Could be the wheel of fortune, maybe.
Oh yeah, for sure. I think that makes sense too.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Good.
And then here's an apron, and you can see that the wedge is missing here. Eye of Providence shining down. You got the 7 stars here, and then also you have the wedge to the side, the keystone. And you know, this keystone has been depicted and created in a lot of different ways, right? And so this acronym, there's a lot to say about that too, but we don't have to get into it. And you see a beehive right in the middle. And I think that this is really interesting because when you look at Cancer in the night sky, there's actually a small area within the constellation of Cancer that's called the Beehive Cluster.
So and NY Patriot's about a shit of brick.
Nice.
He's been talking about this beehive stuff for the last 6 months.
Yeah. Oh, is that right?
You're right down his alley now.
Yeah, you caught my attention.
Nice, dude. That's awesome. So here's just a pin. You know, it says "Let there be light." So this is the light that's shining through when the wedge, the keystone, is actually missing. And then here I'll just get right to it, showing you that their understanding is that this wedge symbolically relates to Cancer. So notice that you have the wheel of the zodiac around this whole entire pendant or whatever it is. And the wedge would be right where we transition from Gemini to Cancer, okay? And here, this came from a Freemasonic magazine. And you can see that this wedge right here, literally, they just label it Cancer. This is Cancer right here, okay? And you can see here, this is a symbol within Royal Arch Masonry that you'll see, this like upside down T sort of thing. But what it's really marking, it's marking the spring equinox, and then the summer solstice, and then the fall equinox. So the transition of signs, or the transition of seasons, and the first sign of each of these 3 seasons, right? And then this is like the first piece of artwork that I came across years ago that got me thinking about. Go ahead.
Yeah, I've seen this before. I just never actually remembered it or noticed that top. Paid attention to that different brick.
Yeah, exactly. So this top keystone, right? Once again, they literally just put Cancer right there, and then you got the 7 stars. So it's no coincidence that again, the Chariot card is the 7th card, and that it's related to the North Star, which is related to the 7 stars of Ursa Major. They're telling you the exit and entry to this place. It's at the north. Right. And then here's another keystone. And so literally this letter right here at the very top is Ket. It's the letter that's associated with the Chariot card. So it's the canopy, and it's in the same position as where the Cancer keystone would be. And that's what it looks like. And then these are just tarot cards. The Crowley Thoth deck, you know, this canopy, once again, is like an important aspect of this card, but it's relating to the Royal Arch as well. And these are the pillars that are connected with this archway. And then, the Hermetic Tarot. Right. And so it's interesting to me that the alternative title for the Chariot card is Lord of the Triumph of Light. And so we're talking about that light shining through from the north. And
Yeah,
so
and then on your left-hand side there of the chariot, right, to reinforce what you're talking about, you have
sure.
the pillars. And this is sort of what I've thought when we look at the Tree of Life or the Kabbalah. I don't think that it's definitely not a two-dimensional thing. I think it's a four-dimensional. It's a 4D object that's being represented in a 2D way with the Tree of Life, right? So that's why I think there are 4 pillars, because it's trying to show that there are 4 total pillars of the structure of the matrix or whatever we're in.
Every Sephiroth has four densities.
Right. Too. Everything has 4 heads, like 4
Absolutely.
suits. So, and on the left-hand side, you have the feminine, right? Represent 2 pillars. So the 4D matrix, but these pillars of the side of the matrix are represented by the feminine. And then on the right-hand side, you have 2 more pillars represented by the masculine with Cancer in the center. Again, with this giant archway at the very top represented by Cancer. Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. Spot on, man.
Yeah, no, exactly. I thought it was really interesting. I love listening to rabbis talk about Hebrew because some of them are just so next level with their wisdom and understanding of the letters. But when I was looking at the Ket, this guy was talking about how it's a canopy and it's symbolic of also the traditional wedding canopy that couples get married underneath. And the tradition is to have 4 pillars, is to have these 4 posts, you know? And so 4 is definitely a number of completion as well, which is why there's 4 traditional elements and all that. The way I kind of look at it too is that these 4 pillars represent the 4 elements, and the charioteer actually represents the 5th element, which would be spirit. Spirit
with 7 stars around his head.
Yeah.
7 rays.
Yep, totally. And so here I even highlighted the beehive cluster within Cancer. You know, there's also within Cancer, it's not highlighted here, but there's an area called the manger. And so I'm finding a lot of Christ symbolism relating to Cancer. And I think it's interesting that Jupiter is actually exalted in Cancer. It's well placed within Cancer, and Jupiter's like the king of the planets, and Christ is the king of kings and everything else. So yeah, so even just within Cancer, there's this beehive manger symbolism that I feel like is worth decoding and understanding and whatever. So yeah, so that's what I got here for you guys.
And the 3 magi went to visit Jesus in the manger by following a star. It's like you can see those deep occult meanings in the Bible and how it reflects something different than what people initially think. It's not that, it's an analogy. These 3 magi, aka magicians, they weren't traveling, in my opinion, by foot for like 3 years. It's an analogy.
Yeah. I completely agree with you. That makes a lot of sense. And so I'm just so biased now when I hear a lot about, if there's a certain star, like what you're saying, like I just immediately, I think of the North Star. I'm like, is that the North Star? Are they talking about the North Star? Are they talking about something else? Obviously, there's always room for interpretation. But based off of my research, I'm just thinking that it was way, way more significant than what a lot of modern people kind of give it credit for.
Yeah.
Which is fascinating too, because the Big Dipper and Little Dipper, it's one of those constellations where even as a kid, a lot of kids know what the Big Dipper looks like, right? I remember knowing what it looked like as a child, and I never in a million years would have guessed that it was related to some of the stuff that I've brought up. Funny enough, too, the Dippers have also been called chariots. They've been called chariots. They've been called wagons. They've been called thighs, the thigh of the bull. They've been called plows. There's a lot of there's a lot of symbolism around the world attributing just different objects to Ursa Major and Ursa Minor. And actually, these stars show up in a lot of flags, too. So there's an Irish flag. It's called the Starry Plow. It's a plow, but it has the 7 stars of Ursa Major. There's Japanese gods that are pole star gods. They're known as being pole star gods. There's Freemasonic lodges that have stars right on the top in the middle of their lodge room on the roof, and there's a ladder going directly to the star, and they publicly acknowledge that it's actually the North Star. It's Polaris. Yeah, so it's really funny. Once you start looking into it, you'll start seeing it kind of all over the place, and how it's kind of hidden, but it's kind of not actually.
So just to hear your opinion on this, because um, this podcast just alone, what we've done so far has really blown me away,
Yeah.
and I really want to hear your opinion on. So, like at the bottom of this, at the heart of it, what is the deep meaning behind? Is this a roadmap to escape, and if so, how? And what are we missing when we look at occultism and we look at the cards? A lot of us think that they're like possibly things to predict the future or upcoming events for our own lives, but is it something way deeper that's being communicated, a way to escape?
You know, I actually think it's a way, it's almost the opposite of escaping. I think it's a way to integrate. And I think it's a way to integrate our higher self and our highest potential. And I think that the power of the pole star, in my opinion, it's kind of taking on like this new philosophical thing for me. And the simplest way I can put it is finding your true north. This is why we refer to the north as being the true north, or we refer to the guiding star as being something that you aspire to or you want to find, right? And so my personal opinion is, when you start tapping into the tarot, and if you have an understanding of this pole star concept that I'm even putting out there, I think what it's really doing is it's integrating all the different aspects of who you are. And I think it's actually a way more holistic way of looking at things, you know, because essentially there's an as above, so below correspondence with this, and as within, so without correspondence with this. So even though I'm talking a lot about the north, and I'm talking about the northern sky, and I'm talking about this gateway, we also have a polar sort of aspect to us. So we are people, you know, and so we are our own poles as well. So I see things from a very unique perspective that's different from you guys. You know, I live where I live. I've had my own experience. I have my own psychology, my own outlook, etc. And so even just having a unique perspective here, I think puts you at the crossroads of everything else. You know, I can't be in your shoes, literally. You know, I can't experience what it's like to live around the world in a place that I've never heard of or ever been. And so what I think is it really hones in on what I keep on referring to. This is another aspect of all this, of the sacred center. And the sacred center is encoded in so many occult symbols, it'll spin your head. It's completely all over the place, you know. So what I think is it's really going back to center, your sacred center, because that's how you really tap into everything, you know. So it's not about an external journey, it's not about an external escape, it's actually about going within, and that's how you really tap in to your true divinity. And that's when like sparks are flying, and that's when you're kind of like really doing the thing that you're kind of here for. And so that's why I'm so passionate about the polar stuff too, and the pole star and everything else, because I think really what it does is it's kind of like a mirror in a lot of ways. And there's actually a lot of symbolism tied to the mirror. I did a whole show with some friends about mirror symbolism, and my take was that there's a northern aspect to it. So the pole star, the sacred center, you know, I think that it's kind of baked into this reality in a lot of ways. And I think that it really speaks to, you know, your true authenticity at the end of the day. And I think, actually, I'm just going to go on this quick tangent. Mm-hmm. They say that men are from Mars and women are from Venus, right? That's like a classic adage, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I actually think that's incorrect now. I believe men are from Mercury and women are from Venus. We're actually mercurial people. That's what we are. And so that's why you have the Venus symbol. It's a circle with a cross at the bottom. You just add horns, and that's Mercury. Mercury is actually the true partner of Venus, not Mars, in my opinion. Mars is way more shallow than Mercury, and Mercury is a polar deity. So Mercury is a psychopomp. He's the guide of souls. Sometimes you see the Mercury symbol in front of this chariot here. So right now it's a top. That central point is symbolic of that axis mundi, of the central axis of the world tree, you know, of this central pole. You know, a lot of mercurial symbolism has to do with a central pole. and serpents wrapped around it, like the caduceus. This is symbolic of Mercury actually traveling from realms, going to the north or going to the higher or lower planes using this gateway that I'm speaking to. So the snakes wrapped around that pole, that's how Mercury gets around. He's a traveler, and so he takes people to different places and things like that. He's associated with the crossroads, and so it's like we here live at a symbolic crossroads in a lot of different ways, between the above and between the below, and so Mercury is very much related to the phallus, which makes him related to the pole or post or pillar, things like that. And now when I look at this shape, when I look at the number 1, that's what I think of. I think of this central axis. I think of this central pole that connects the above with the below. The magician card corresponds with Mercury. That's why he's holding up his wand, and that's why he has another hand downward, because he's connected, between these realms. He can travel between these realms, essentially. And so even, I'm not sure, have you guys ever gotten into the Bach saga on here by chance, or know anything about it?
I had Andy on a cover it once, Andy from Deep Share, but we kind of, we didn't get too deep into it, but we covered over it on my show. But yeah, if you want to go on to that, I actually think there's a lot of validity with that. I think there's something up with that stuff for sure.
I'm currently reading it right now. I talked to Andy about the Bach saga not too long ago. And one of the things they say, 2 things that really stuck with me as it relates to Northern symbolism, is that they literally believe that the eye is the central axis mundi pole, and that the dot on top of the lowercase I is actually the pole star. And so that's their research, is that according to the Bach saga people, is that the dot on top of the I is the pole star. The same way I think that when you're putting a star on top of a Christmas tree, you're putting the pole star, the North Star, on top of the world tree. And where does Santa come from? He comes from the North Pole. So Christmas is just, it's a northern symbolic holiday that actually encodes a lot of North Star stuff once you start looking into it. But that central pole, that eye, that tree, that's what Mercury goes up and down. That's how he travels between realms symbolically.
Well, Toth even has the caduceus, and he's associated with he would be associated with that sphere, Hode, that Mercury falls on with the tree of life. So I mean, even the caduceus would fit kind of, because that's what he carries around with him.
Yeah, absolutely, 100%. And so that's how I interpret it. So even our spine is our pole. And so the whole deal is that everything seemingly, this is what I'm proposing, everything seemingly comes from the north and returns to the north. And a lot of groups around the world had this idea that their sages, their main sages, like in Hindu mythology, they believe that the 7 rishis, notice that 7 again, the 7 rishis came from the northern sky and bestowed all this wisdom upon humanity. And so this is like a classic sort of motif sort of thing. So if everything came from the north, everything is going to be symbolic of the north as well. So when I'm breaking down symbolism now, I run it through this filter of like, how does it relate back to the north actually? Because everything seemingly comes from that place. So even my girlfriend, she's a gardener. There you go, man. Yeah, the Taurus field. Exactly right. Yep, exactly.
Yep. Starting in the north, going south, coming back.
Yep.
Almost looks like
that's it, dude. Yeah, for sure.
Or a tooth.
Yeah.
It does. Absolutely. No, that's spot on, man. I love that.
You mentioned...
That's, just for listeners real quick, that's not from us. That's not something I just drew up with
no.
That's from the CIA documents that they spent a decade researching astral travel, magic, occultism. Check it out. You can even go on the CIA website, just type in Operation Gateway, Project Gateway, Gateway Experiment, and these documents will come up. So
yeah.
You mentioned before the whole thing with Mercury and Venus. And when I've looked at the Tree of Life and going by like symbolism and ceremonial magic and stuff, have you ever heard of like the Yad-Hey Vad-Hey formula? The king,
Yeah,
the
the
king, queen.
Tetragrammaton?
Yeah, the king, queen, prince, and princess, and there were fire, water, air, and earth. I've often thought that Mercury was the prince and Venus, or Hode or Mercury would be the prince. Netzach and Venus would be the princess, and then possibly Binah would be the queen, and then maybe Chokmah would be the king, or maybe that other I can't remember Chesed, but I think more of Chokmah maybe. But I even see how even that's how I would see like the man really kind of would still be with 7, and I think that's like starting your journey of actually going up the tree really.
Yeah, right on. No, I could totally see that too. There's a lot more work I need to do with that side of things for sure. But I hear what you're saying. Absolutely. So the tree of life, again, you're talking about the world tree, so this is okay. I'm going to get into some information that is really, I think it's kind of groundbreaking personally. It's blowing my mind. We'll see if it translates over. You know what I mean?
All right.
But I'm reading this book right now. It's been a long sort of thing. I haven't had as much time to read it as I would like to, but it's something that I've learned a lot from so far. And it's called At the Center of the World by this guy named John Michel. And what he's saying is that a lot of older groups, this is like an intuitive thing. I think in some ways it's probably taught. I think it overlaps a lot with Bach Saga stuff actually. But people want a cultural center. They want a place to call home. And within that cultural center, they want a specific place that they can call their sacred center. So a lot of ancient groups had this intuitive understanding that if we have an empire, if we have a group, if we have a clan, we want to find this central location of where we live. And so this was like an art. So let's just say you and your family and your tribe or whatever lived on an island. You would locate the center of the island. And obviously islands are organic, and there's lots of natural things kind of going on with how the island or the geography would be shaped. But they would find, to their best estimation, what the cultural sacred center of that land would be. And they would oftentimes put something to identify this spot. So it could be a stone, it can be a tree, it can be all sorts of different things, right? A lot of people chose to put a world tree there. They would put their family tree there. And this tree was symbolic of like basically their lifestyle and livelihood. It was symbolic of everything. They put everything into this tree. And so they would even bury, this is more of like a European sort of thing, but they would put this tree at the sacred center, and then they would bury their family's ancestors at the roots of this tree, at the base of this tree. So then when you grew up, your family would say, hey, grandma, grandpa, all of your ancestors, they're all buried within this tree. And they fucking like defended this thing like nobody's business. Like this was like the end all be all of like their whole entire community. And so a lot of times this sacred center location would be where they have different rituals, festivals. It was where they would delegate new laws. My understanding is that a lot of the people who were, at the head of this hierarchy of this tribe or family or clan or whatever, that they would view themselves as the gods around the world tree, kind of like Yggdrasil, like the Nordic world tree, right? And so when this tree or when this spot was taken over, this guy says that this was like the beginning of the end of their way of living, that this was the beginning of the end of like their little empire or their community. And so he was saying that they would fight for this location, and conversely, if you were an enemy, then you would try and take over this location, right? Well, we have like lost this concept, in a lot of ways, but it's interesting that a lot of city centers, especially old cities, still have this cultural sacred center, this city center. So as an example, London has the London Stone. So there's this stone in the middle of London that it represents symbolically the middle of London. There's a spire in the middle of Dublin that symbolically represents the middle of Dublin. There's a lot of these types of things all over the place that represent like the center of a city, the center of a region, or the center of a country. This is a thing. And there's even people whose jobs it is, apparently, they're called centrographers. Their job is to find the sacred center of like a country, as an example. And then they would identify it with something. So this spot was so important that we just largely don't have anything like that anymore. But there are groups that still have their sacred center location still intact. And what they believe is that this is the center of the world. This is what they believe. And all of these groups, there's so many groups that say like the center of the world is right there. It's right here. It's in our backyard. It's down the way, you know? And so you would think like, wait, how do all of these groups believe that they are at the center or the genesis of everything? It's like, well, this is what the sacred center kind of like teaches you, is that, you know, culturally, if this is your homeland and this is the spot that you revere more than anything else, you almost can imagine that anybody who has this strong belief in that area or in this thing would think that this is actually the center of the world. So I don't blame people for thinking that at all. But like in Jerusalem, as an example, Jerusalem is the heart of Israel, and the Temple Mount is at the heart of Jerusalem. You know, and what is underneath the Temple Mount? What is it within the dome of the rock? It's a rock. There's a rock with a hole that is somehow got drilled through it or whatever. And they say that, you know, there is an abyss down there or a cave or something to that effect down there. And so what's going on? Well, every few years you have Jews and Muslims fighting over this sacred center location of the Dome of the Rock within Jerusalem, within Israel, because this is exactly what I'm speaking to. They consider this to be a polar axis location that is at the center of everything. And people who really believe in that, they believe wholeheartedly in it. It's like not even a question. It's like, no, this is the center of the world. Of course it is. The same way Bach Saga people, they believe that Helsinki was the center of everything and that the world tree was in Helsinki, you know? And so I learned recently that polis at the end of like metropolis or Heliopolis or Minneapolis actually means pole. And so literally cities are poles. They're polar, magnetic, energetic locations.
Did you say Heliopolis?
So, yeah.
That's interesting because like in the OTO, when you go to Doom and Nerval, they kind of act out that they catch you and capture you and bring you to like some camp as you're on your way to Heliopolis.
Interesting. Yeah, so that polis, it's a reference to the pole, you know? And so that's why, too, even a lot of cities, what do you see in the middle of the city? You see these freaking buildings that just go straight up, you know? They're polar in nature. So at the, you know, in a lot of places, like the oldest, most developed part of the city has these buildings, you know, that just shoot straight up. And so there's just this polar understanding that, you know, I'm starting to realize that was completely lost on me, you know, years ago. But once you see it and you start reading about it, you start realizing like, oh, okay, well, this is, I think, how a lot of things used to be done, like back in the day. So, you know, in the Bach Saga, they would refer to their different areas of their region as ringlands. And so the middle of the ring would be where a world tree is, where a tribe would be, where a people would descend to do their rituals and what have you. And then, you know, their area would just kind of extend out from that central pole. And then down the way, you know, there's another ringland that has another sacred center. And then over on this island, there's another ringland that has a sacred center, you know. Kind of reminds me of Atlantis in a way, the ringlands.
That's interesting. You got me fucked up even with just that whole Heliopolis thing. Because like even inside the lodge, like at the point of like they have like a tent that's set up, but it looks like it's opened up, like it's like the opening of the veil. And like
yes.
in my opinion, like it's telling you, like thinking about it now, like was I going from one pole to the next, and I just happened to be birthed into this reality? Because then you cross like another threshold of things, and then you're like with all your friends and you're eating and they're playing music. Like now you're definitely in Earth, you know, or here in the physical realm. You got food, music, right. You know, you got everything going on now, more people. So that's really weird. You got me thinking about that now.
Is there a central prop pole within
yeah,
that tent
inside the tent. There's a pole,
That's
a white
that's the-
pole that is clearly visible that I think is meant to see on purpose. That is inside.
That's the
that
world
tent.
pole. That's the Axis Mundi. That's the world tree. That's what you're dealing with there. And I was saying earlier about the canopy. You're dealing with canopies within the tent. So actually, there's a history with tent symbolism and that central pole literally being the Axis Mundi. That's what you're dealing with. That's symbolically what's being encoded.
Oh,
So when you're doing magic and you're in a lodge and you're in a like a lodge room, right? And there's the checkerboard floor, or even if you're doing magic at home and you're calling the 4 directions or whatever, you're acknowledging the 4 directions in whatever way you do that. You're basically saying, I'm at the center of everything. That's what symbolically you're encoding. So when you make a sacred space, that's what I do now. If I'm doing anything along those lines, I'm at the fucking center of everything. And that's just the deal, So I think that there's a lot of lodges and mystery schools and stuff like that. They are baking in that symbolism in their rituals and in those sacred spaces.
Yeah, well, you sure made it sound like it for me now. Fuck. Wow, that's some good shit, man.
Something I was going to point out that I've been doing some research into more of like I don't know, just studying occultism for so long. I've started to think that, okay, when you look at the pillars, I'll share my screen real quick so people can get an idea as to where I'm going with this. So there you go. So you have the tree of life, right? And you have the female pillar on the left and the male pillar on the right, but you also have a center pillar, right? So that's why I was saying I think it possibly is a 4D, cube of space or whatever, with a center pillar going into the middle. And what that's referencing is balance between the extremes of the female and the male pillars, because the female represents emotion. It represents, being caught up into a very emotional state, whereas the male side represents more of just totally ignoring emotion. And it's more about just logic, right? So you have logic, which would be the mind, and then you have the female, which would be the heart, and then you have the center pillar, which would be the will. So it's like combining these 3 things into the center pillar, representing the balance of the male and the female, so that, as we look deep inside and we do meditation, that's what real magic is about. That in order for, like you were saying earlier, for us not so much to escape, but to move upwards, right? To get out. The only way that we can do that is by integrating what we realize, the things and flaws that we have within ourselves, and integrating it into the middle pillar, which would be that we're not balanced too far to the left or too far to the right with emotion, or with just totally being in the logical mindset, and that we use our hearts and our minds, what we think, what we feel, and then we integrate that into our will, and then that will, which puts things into this reality. It's like the Holy Trinity described in the Bible, right? It's for us to move upward, we have to harness the heart and the mind and the will so that we can move up the next level.
Yeah, man. No, it makes perfect sense. And so when I see that, notice obviously that the middle pillar extends above the other Sephiroth on the sides, the male and the female. And then notice that it also goes below the others as well.
Right.
So I consider this, the middle pillar, to be the trunk of the world tree. It's the strongest aspect of this layout and design. And so when I see the middle pillar, I make a direct association with it, with the world pole, with the world tree and everything that I'm kind of talking about. And I think it's kind of interesting. It's just reminding me, but Kether, you remove the K and it's ether.
Yes.
And so I think that there's kind of a relationship going on with that as well, of this etheric sort of aspect to this polar concept that I'm talking about, in that it bridges the gap between the lower realms, the material realm, the physical realm, and then the higher realms, which would be more etheric or spiritual or whatever, or heavenly.
I've often wondered
absolutely.
if Kether and Ether, like you're saying, like if that K, that play off of that is why Crowley added the K in magic. Because if there's like a play off of that as well.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, no, I had not considered that.
Yeah, well, that's among the many things that you could try to consider why he added the K. So many, but
Right. Yeah, for sure. Nice.
yeah,
Very cool.
Yeah,
So
that was
how
great,
long were you studying all this for? Or how long were you part of that group for?
me, I was at least 5 years with the OTO.
Okay.
Yeah,
Gotcha.
For me, probably I'd say roughly 10,
yeah.
around that.
Oh, okay.
Not
Right on.
not organized, not in a secret society, but studying like occultism.
I see. Okay.
You say that's where I got all those patients from. Fuck. Being in a secret society for 10 fucking years. Fuck.
NY and I have a very similar background with like how we got into everything, but I think that I don't know. I think you might have got in earlier than I did. I can't. We haven't really talked about it too much, but yeah, essentially we started looking into occultism because of the crazy conspiracy stuff that we were seeing online and found it really interesting. We wanted to protect ourselves. We wanted to be able to figure out what occultism was, how it worked, because we felt as though that there was a class or a group of people who were making decisions at a governmental level, all different aspects of society, that they understood a system that we didn't, and we wanted to protect ourselves. So that's why we got into it,
Yeah, it was actually like, how do I try to like maneuver this matrix with the least amount of like resistance,
Right.
For real. But like, not to be an asshole and actually become a better person. Like that had, it wasn't like really like,
Yeah. No, man. I mean, I know you guys know this already, but symbolic awareness is like one of the most important sort of things, in my opinion, that you could do for yourself, because otherwise you're just getting played left and right, in so many different ways. It's kind of unbelievable. And so that was kind of part of it for me too. Is just like, well, I don't want to be, played like a fiddle. And so I want to know, it's like, what's really going on in the world. And once I started realizing that, occultism is kind of like the foundation for a lot of other things. It's like the underground and the above ground. It's like the underground sort of businesses, if you want to call it that, underground industries or economies or whatever. It affects the above ground way more than people realize. You know what I mean? And like what happens underneath, just like with us in psychology, it's like what's happening in the subconscious affects everything else. And so that's what occultism is all about. It's just like, these are like, we're trying to decode all of the signs and the symbols that basically are being put in front of our faces like all the time. You know what I mean? So how many people wear charms and wear t-shirts or get tattoos or whatever of things that they have like no understanding of, like at all. It's a lot. Most people are like that. So I think symbolic awareness, obviously I champion that anytime I can. That's why I made Symbolic Studies, in part because I was learning so much shit that I just wanted to like get some of this stuff out there and hopefully share it with others that might appreciate it.
Oh, that was awesome, man.
Yeah.
I think, and if you don't mind, I think we could probably just wrap it up there if you don't mind. But that was like awesome. And I really would like to have you on again and just pick out a couple more cards and talk shit for an hour and a half. That was awesome. Yeah,
nice,
it was really, came out. I mean, I thought it was going to be a good show anyway, but I really, truly had fun and enjoyed that.
Yeah,
that was nice.
And it's really very nice to see people come together, because we all know we all know something slightly different than the other. And so what we're doing is we're putting the pieces together of what we know, right? It doesn't matter how many books we've read or how long we've studied the occult or how much we know about these certain systems. It's about just people who are studying these subjects that are hidden coming together so that we can all figure this out. Because to me personally, I think in the last 5 years, I've seen a huge amount of people getting online, starting podcasts, talking, and it wasn't like that before. And I think that we're getting close, especially with conversations like this. We're getting close to figuring this stuff out. Forget all of the egos, forget all of that bullshit. It's not to sell 8 billion books or to mislead people to believe something fictional. just to, for whatever reason. It's just people who care about these subjects because we want to understand where we are, what we're in, and what's being kept from us. So these conversations are goddamn so much more valuable that you can't put a price tag on it. And just very thankful that you came on tonight.
Yeah.
Right on, man.
For
yeah,
sure.
thank you guys so much. This was great. And I know, too, just like what you're saying, everyone has a piece of the puzzle. So I know there are things to be learned from you guys. And so I want to pick your brains as well at some point. Hopefully we
Awesome.
can do that next time.
Yeah. You know what I think
yeah.
was great is like, I know me and Lux kind of look at tarot a little bit differently than other people. And like, you kind of looked at it that way, but then you also took us to a whole other direction that I've never even thought of looking at.
Right,
you know?
right,
and
right.
I was just like, holy, you know, so like, and I wasn't discrediting. I was like, you know, it made sense to me, you know, and I think that was a great conversation. You know, we're both
right
able
on.
to
Nice,
add
dude.
stuff, I think, together, and you know, you know, we're able to see what's going on. That was awesome.
Hell yeah. I'm into it, dude.
it was a lot of
Anytime,
fun.
I would love to come back. So once
Sure.
again, my name's Mario from Symbolic Studies. Symbolicstudies.com is where you can find all my channels. Symbolic.studies is where I'm at on Instagram. That's kind of one of my hubs, I would say. And I do offer tarot readings. I have what I call elemental study packets. They're name your price. You can find all of that stuff on my site. If you guys have any questions out there about any of this stuff, feel free and reach out.
I
But
also,
yeah, this was awesome.
I also added your Instagram too, because I assumed that you'd contact. You know, we were able to talk through there. I already added it, assuming if people wanted to get in touch with you, he does answer on Instagram. And pretty quickly too, you know. So I can vouch for that. I wasn't expecting an answer back so fast, and he actually answered me. So you could definitely get in touch with him there. And I put his site in the bottom already with the show notes as well. We got our show notes in there. You can find everything that me, Lux, and the Occult Rejects got going on in there. We have a Telegram channel for right now. We might be working on something next. When that comes out, we'll definitely make an announcement. But something a little bit different than Discord, but looks pretty fucking cool and looks just like Discord. So that's in the works. And so hopefully that will work out well. It will be another place that we can kind of all join and not have to worry about getting censored or taken down as easily as we have been. So that should be something nice. And we had to thank the fans and the listeners for that, because it was like a bunch of them that did that. So thank you for that. Yeah, so that's about it. Yeah, the links are all on the bottom for his show, my show, the Occult Rejects, Lux's show, all that stuff. We have a bunch of stuff in our link tree, so just check that out. Thank you, everybody, for jumping in on the live. That was awesome. There was a bunch of people in here. Thank you, Slick, for jumping in, too. Thank you, Brandy. Thank you, Crook, Arnold, you know, all you guys. Thank you all for jumping in. And that was a great show. Thank you very much. And until the next one, everybody be well. Later.